Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Welcome, everybody. I want to welcome my very good friend, Matthew Lazar, who is the leading force of the Jewish choral movement in North America. His superior talents as a conductor and interpreter of Jewish music have elevated the standards of Jewish musical performance and educated audiences across North America. His visionary leadership led to the creation of the Zamir Choral Foundation, which continues to nurture the growth of Jewish choral singing in North America and Israel. In addition to directing the Zamir Choral, he has also created the Mantua Singers, the Sela Vocal Ensemble, and Shira, the community chorus of the Kaplan JCC on the Palisades. He has inspired the creation of adult choral ensembles throughout the United States, and through the Zamir Choral Foundation's Mandel Rosen Fund for New Music has contributed to the expansion of the choral repertoire through commissions of new music by the finest composers in North America and Israel. Matthew Lazar's establishment of the North American Jewish Choral Festival has provided a forum for hundreds of Jewish choral singers to come together for an annual week-long immersion in Jewish choral music. And if I remember correctly, you once invited me to participate in one of those. We can talk about that later. In 1993, Mr. Lazar turned his attention to the next generation with his creation of Zamir. What began in Manhattan as a single choir to provide quality choral singing opportunities for Jewish high school students has grown into an ever-expanding international movement. In addition to his activities in the realm of Jewish choral music, Maestro Lazar has also appeared as guest conductor of the American Symphony Orchestra, the El Paso Symphony Orchestra, the Milwaukee Chamber Symphony, the Ra'anana Symphony, and at the Ravinia Music Festival. Mr. Lazar regularly appears with the great cantors of this generation and presents programs at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, and other major concert halls in the United States and Israel. He has served on the faculties of Columbia University and the Jewish Theological Seminary, and is a frequent lecturer and scholar in residence in communities and universities across the United States. Wow, welcome. Years ago, you asked me to call you Mati. So should I, and Mati is
my nickname, and why not?
Why not? Warum nicht? So I will call you, probably Mati will spill out of my mouth more than Matthew in this interview. Well, welcome. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you. We don't do it frequently, but when we do, it's always very exciting for me.
It's good to have a friendship that lasts more than half a century.
That's right, exactly. And you and I studied more than half a century ago with the same teacher at Queens College, Paul Maynard. For me, that was an unbelievable, life-changing experience. Did you get your master's in choral conducting with him?
No, Queens College didn't offer a master's in choral conducting. I got a master's in musicology/theory.
Oh.
But we both were inspired by Paul Maynard and his genius way of communicating, and his so authentic and so remarkable an individual.
Yeah. Well, actually, you were a year or two ahead of me. So they did start the Master of Arts in Conducting, choral conducting, when I graduated with my bachelor's degree. So I was very fortunate to study with him. And for those of you who don't know, he was the keyboard player for the New York Pro Musica. And then when its founder, Noah Greenberg, passed away, he took over as the leader on tour with them. So what were you thinking when, as an upperclassman in the music department, a freshman, that would be me, invited you and two of your friends, baritone Elliot Levine and pianist William Westney, to form a barbershop quartet?
It was out of our normal wheelhouse, but we thought it was great. And of course, because we all sang with Paul, we had immediate respect for you and knew that if someone who was good enough to sing with Paul was suggesting this out of the box thinking, we should jump into that box as well. I remember singing between you and Bill and the vocal ensemble, and both of you have perfect pitch, but it wasn't exactly the same perfect pitch. And whatever I sang was unhappy for one of you.
That is funny. I didn't remember that. Yeah, there are variables there. But it was so much fun. We had the quartet for, I think, three years, and we sang at a local chapter of the Barbershop Society. We sang at Queens College, and we called ourselves the
Razumovsky Quartet. What an inside joke that was.
Yeah, right. And if you're listening to this and you don't understand that, you can look it up. Razumovsky Quartet has something to do with Franz Joseph Haydn. So let's go back to the founding of the Zamir Choral Foundation, and even before, if we need to learn how much a huge and impressive international movement was founded. Can you tell us the story of how it came about?
Well, the Zamir Choral was a choir that I sang with when I was in high school. It was then called the Mossad Choral Group after a summer camp where the group had really founded itself. But for a variety of reasons, we ended up changing our name. We got a 501c3, and I took over as conductor in 1972. But I developed more of an interest in not just conducting the choir, but in Jewish choral music as a vehicle for Jewish identity, for self-expression. And I realized that teenagers needed to be involved, and other kinds of musical ensembles needed to be expanded. So it wasn't just a choir, not just one choir. And in 1990, I changed it, the 501c3 from Zamir Choral to Zamir Choral Foundation. Dropping that E cost me a lot of money and a lot of time. As you know, this part of the business too, of course.
Yeah, because I changed my 501c3 from the Canticum Novum Singers to CNS Productions to Canticorum Virtuosi Inc. for various reasons. So I do know. Well, that's great. Now, some of our listeners might not know what secular Jewish music is. Can you explain this?
I will. Let me just back up for a second and explain the different parts of the foundation.
Yeah.
So people will understand. Zamir Choral is a choir which I joined as a teenager, as I said, and now has people who in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and touching their 70s who sing. It's an adult choir. The Hazamir, which is our teen program, it's really a Jewish musical youth movement, has over 400 singers in 41 chapters across the US and Israel. We have a pre-teen new idea that my wife Vivian created. She's the director of Hazamir, called Haza Prep. It's the only prep program for Jewish teens to be learning the skills of real choral singing, not just singing in unison, but to really understand the vocabulary and to understand what blending might be and phrasing and all those things that we take for granted, but 11th and 12th graders don't do right now. And we also have post-college and college-age choirs to serve those kids who finished Hazamir and could not find the standard of excellence. And that, of course, is what we both, that's one of our friendship points, is excellence in music. Mm-hmm. Excellent music and excellence in performing the music. And in Jewish music, it's pretty hard to find that to say. I remember when I heard, I must have been 8 years old, and my father was pretty knowledgeable musically and Jewishly. He quoted me Toscanini's great remark, "Tradition is just the last bad performance." And I, woof, huh? And I thought he was talking about Jewish music.
Oh, goodness. Well, you've elevated that art. I mean, how do you manage all these choirs, all these conductors, 2 different countries? Do you have a big staff?
We have a staff of about, Hazamir has its own staff. The foundation has a staff of about 6 full-time people and 5 part-time people.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite an undertaking.
And,
but
yeah, go ahead.
But the staff is dedicated. Everyone really, they're all choral singers one way or another. They appreciate what choral music can do. It's a paradigm of community, and you know that, and your listeners know it. And it engages both sides of the brain, the part of the brain that's thinking about the text and processing intellectually, and the emotional side of the brain, which is self-expression and when those two things happen at the same time, that's why they call it the Heilige Kunst. It is a holy art.
Wow, that's incredible. And do you, I know you go to Israel regularly, you have always, is it part of that to, connect with your staff over there and the singers over there? And do you feel you have to go back and forth?
Well, we like going back and forth, but we also have programming there. So we have 2 retreats a year, and we do, Zamir does a very big concert every March, April in Lincoln Center, at Carnegie, 1 year at the Met. And we repeat that concert. Yeah, pretty amazing. And we repeat that concert in Israel for the parents of the Israeli kids, and who don't usually come to America to see the concert in Lincoln Center. And then we meet with people there to expand our program there. And a lot of our expansion is in the periphery. So we'll have Ethiopian kids who really barely know what Western music is, or recent immigrants, and we train them in the skills. And it's a community-based event, and we love being there.
Wow. Now, when you say the Met, let me just explain. This is not the Metropolitan Museum. This is not the baseball team. This is the Metropolitan Opera House, which has a huge number of seats to fill. That was amazing. Was that for a special occasion?
The special occasion was that we had a contract with Avery Fisher, and they wanted to change it because a variety of financial incentives. So we ended up having to move to the Met, which was more expensive, but of course there are more seats there. So it balanced out, and it almost balanced out, but the thrill of being on that stage was unforgettable for the singers, for the performers. And I have to tell you, the staff at the Met is awesome, just awesome.
What is the acoustic?
Staff, the staff at the Met.
Yeah.
They're just so, I mean, what would you expect? But professional, our kids are very, when I say kids, they're teenagers, so you can't really call them kids, but they're so disciplined and so, they sing by heart. They're not sitting. And as Vivian trains them, and it's the famous quote in Zamir, if you're on stage in Carnegie Hall and a tarantula crawls down your face, what do you do? And the answer is nothing.
That's
professional.
That is funny. So let me go back now to secular Jewish music, because I know people know that in synagogues, especially at Orthodox synagogues, it's all singing. But tell me about secular Jewish music.
Well, I'd have to say that secular Jewish music is based on the 2 or 3 millennia history, actually 3 or 4 millennia history of the Jewish people. So there is poetry, there's the experience, the Jewish experience, especially since the dispersion of the Jews with the Roman exile in the 1st century, 2nd century. And that's why we have Yiddish speaking repertoire, Yiddish being the combination of Hebrew and German, Ladino, which is a combination of Spanish and Hebrew. And so there would be poetry, there would be folk music, the way that texts arise. Unfortunately, the Holocaust provided a lot of repertoire where people would reclaim ancient texts or create new texts. And a lot of the secular, quote unquote, secular repertoire of choral music is basically liturgical or biblical texts, I should say, in non-liturgical settings. So one of the most interesting functions, not functions, but one of the most interesting facets of Israeli music was that they would take ancient texts or texts that were very familiar from the Bible, and they would use very popular kind of or folk kind of melodies for it, and sometimes they changed one word in the text. So there's an important part when you take the Torah, the Holy Scroll out, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, out of Zion shall come the Torah, and the Israeli folk version is Ki mitzion ho tetzei Torah. So they added the syllable ho, and it stops being religious and becomes just Jewish consciousness in folk music.
Wow. That's fascinating. That reminds me of the Beethoven in the Missa Solemnis. Instead of miserere nobis, have mercy on us, he added the word oh miserere nobis. But that's a different story. But this is so fascinating. because as you know, I contracted singers for the high holiday services at Kutcher's in Monticello. And the cantor was David Fisher, or Dudu Fisher, a famous, very famous cantor and pop star in Israel. And some of the liturgical, Yom Kippur prayers were sung to New York, New York, and give my regards to Broadway. I mean, very rarely, but with Jewish words, with Hebrew words.
Well, he was on Broadway in starring.
I know.
Unbelievable. So he liked to bring that into the service.
Did you? We're going to get to this later, but did you ever hear a more versatile singer than him? I heard him sing a long phrase, starting off in the middle register, going up to a high tenor C, sustained, and then without taking a breath, he went down the scale to a low bass G, and then back up to the high tenor C in one breath. I couldn't believe it.
I've never heard anyone do that acrobatic trick, but Herman Malamed, who I worked with at the Concord, to speak of the Catskill Mountains, who shared a role with Pavarotti, was a great singer.
Wow.
And he could do that. He didn't have that low G, but he could live on those C's, and he could go down to an A.
Wow.
But he was mostly at the Concord performing the music that Shalom Secunda had written for Richard Tucker when Tucker was the cantor at the Concord.
Right.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Do you know I sat on Richard Tucker's knee when I was 7 years old?
Oh.
I sang in the Sam Sterner choir as a 7-year-old and up in the Kutchers. And I don't know if Richard Tucker was the cantor or just visiting, but I remember him putting me on his knee.
Well, Sam Sterner was famous for pinching the cheeks. I don't see the damage on your cheek.
Oh yeah, but he gave me an ulcer.
Oh.
He gave me an active duodenal ulcer, but that's another story. Anyway, now speaking of cantors, I mean, I've worked with some great ones, but mainly with your, you introduced me to, you hired me or whatever for various things, but you must have worked with 10 times as many great cantors. And what has been the role of cantors, and how has that changed over the decades?
Well, the cantor is really the precentor. If you look at a Christian liturgy, and actually the word cantor was first introduced by Solomon Zulzer, who is a very important cantor in Vienna, and a friend of Schubert. Schubert came to the synagogue. In fact, Schubert's setting of Psalm 92, written in Hebrew, was commissioned by Zulzer.
Wow.
And Liszt would come to that shul, and I think there's a quote from Schubert saying, "Until I heard Zulzer singing the Winterreise, I didn't really understand it," which is a hard thing to comprehend.
Yeah,
but
right.
he was the first person to use the word cantor, because he was trying to show that Jewish music, apropos of my previous remark, could be first-rate music. And so he chose as his title Bach's title in Leipzig. Cantor.
Oh, the cantor, yeah, cantor.
So that's really where that comes from.
Wow.
In Hebrew, it would be a chazan.
Right.
Right. But in English or auf Deutsch, you end up with this cantor, which of course comes from the Latin anyway.
Right.
So the role of the cantor has really changed. The cantor is supposed to represent the congregation. And if you think back in history, before the printing press, and people didn't really have things to read, and Hebrew worship goes back a long time. So either you knew the prayers by heart, or you were reduced to hearing the cantor intone on your behalf, and you would say Amen, and thereby including yourself in the prayer to the Almighty. So that was an extreme version of that. And then the cantor became, in modern era, became still a representative of the congregation, and is Gerson Cohen, who is one of the chancellors of the Jewish Theological Seminary, once said in a fantastic moment of truism that you don't expect the rabbinical leader to say. He said, the rabbi tells the people what God wants, but the cantor tells God what the people want, which is phenomenal articulation of what the best of it is.
Yeah.
And so cantors were great singers, and they could they would, if you heard a great cantor fixating on a word or fixating on a phrase, driving home the request of the congregation, or often his own personal request on behalf of the congregation, you would feel the emotion of it. Just like in great opera, you hear the emotion of the individual. In this case, it would be the emotion of the individual on behalf of the congregation or on behalf of the people. And that now has changed, where it's no longer the cantor, as the enemies of that kind of cantor would say, the performance cantor. But now it's much more participatory. It's not only in the Jewish tradition. So now, except in the Orthodox world, most cantors are now playing the guitar and are being taught to play the guitar. And there is a Jewish mode, musical. There are many Jewish musical modes, and there are specific modes for each of the holidays. And sometimes they're in the Orthodox community, they're taught and it's expected to be performed. And if you don't, that you just show your level of knowledge or ignorance. But most of the tunes that are sung in the conservative and reform temples and synagogues are not based on traditional Jewish modes, but are based on the 6 chords that most amateur musicians can play on the guitar, and that the audience can sing along with. And that's the real big difference now, how music functions. And it's not, of course, only in the synagogue. Participation is the name of the game in most worship services. And it's very odd to me, because the same people who go to hear the New York Philharmonic play, you don't often hear them singing along with the themes of the Dvorak New World Symphony and think that they listen in what we would call active listening and are inspired by it. So I'm not sure exactly why that can't be equally a part of the Jewish worship service, where active listening needs to be shunted aside so people can be singing along together, which has its own value, of course.
Right. Wow. Are there young cantorial students with amazing voices who would rather it be the way it was 20 or 30 years ago, more than the guitar element?
I would say there are, but it's really a function of what are the jobs, what jobs are available. And the job of a rabbi has pretty much stayed the same, but the job of the cantor is now usually cantor dash something, cantor dash educator, cantor or something. So it's not just show up and like it was when I was growing up, or in the Tucker days, where you came to be inspired by great performances of great music, and you were elevated in the rest of your life in that way. Now it's a completely different thing, and I'm not sure. There are definitely cantors who would love to sing the great masterpieces, but in order to function, at least in the reform and the conservative environments, they usually have to tailor it to the community.
But they have other outlets, both in the synagogue and outside of it. They can give recitals, and a lot of them sing professionally outside the synagogue. To
be sure.
Yeah.
Although the job of many cantors is, when it's a full-time job, it is a full-time job. Very hard to, you're not going to get a gig somewhere on a Saturday or on a Sunday and be able to fulfill it.
Right. Well, back to you and your organization and your relationships with Elie Wiesel and Dr. Ruth. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was really a privilege to be in the circle of friends with Elie Wiesel, of course. He was the honorary chairman of the Zamir Choral Foundation for a quarter of a century until he passed away in 2016. I met him at a very interesting moment. In 1973, November of 1973, he wrote an oratorio called Ani Ma'amin, I Believe, with music by Darius Milhaud. And it was performed in Carnegie Hall. It was about 2 hours by itself. And the NYU Choral Society, under the direction of John de Revere, if my memory serves, did perform that piece. In the first half, can you imagine, the 2 hour second half, and the first half of the program was Symphony of Psalms, which Zamir sang. But the Milhaud was so dense, let me say it that way, that they needed something authentic. And so Ellie asked that we sing Ani Ma'amin, the classic melody for, I believe, the great Maimonides' 12th article of faith. I believe in the coming of the Messiah, and even though the Messiah tarries, I wait for the Messiah every day. And so at the very end of the program, the Zamir Choral, and the top of the balcony, the real balcony of Carnegie, sang this Ani Ma'amin. And the way I first met Ellie was I'm on the balcony at a dress rehearsal, and I hear Ellie saying, "Mati Lazar, how is the balance?" and he was really a terrifically musical individual. Really, I mean, amazingly so.
Well, I met him after a service, a slichot service that you asked me to conduct in that new synagogue. I forget the name of it, off Fifth Avenue and 65th Street, around the
62nd Street, yeah.
Yeah, that Cantor Malavani headed, and I saw Elie Wiesel in the congregation, and afterwards I saw him walking, and I struck up a conversation. And if my memory serves me correctly, you know, I asked him a few questions, and he said that he majored in choral conducting in college or something like that.
Not exactly. He played the violin before the war, and he went off to the camps, you know, when he was still a teenager. But after the war, he conducted a girls' choir in Paris.
Wow.
And he was such a musician. The first time I went to visit him in his apartment, he had the complete, in a record form, because that's what there was in those days, the complete works of Josquin des Prez.
Oh.
I didn't have the complete works of Josquin des Prez, but he had it. And one of the most amazing experiences I ever had with him, and I had several musical ones, and of course others as well, was that he loved the slow movement, the second movement of Beethoven's Seventh. He loved that counter melody. Da 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 da.
Yeah.
Da 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 da. I'll tell you why. Da 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 da. And C sharp to the C natural. He, you know, that was the experience of the Jewish people for him.
Oh my God.
And it was revelatory, really.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was lucky enough to do a concert with him. The only time we ever gave a concert, where at the 92nd Street Y, it was called Melodies and Memories of My Childhood, where he sang all the Hasidic melodies that he grew up with in Europe, and one or two French pieces he had learned when he was in France. And he was incredibly musical, and he almost always sang in C.
Like Irving Berlin, he really played piano very well, so everything had to be in C.
Yeah, with that funny keyboard he made up. Yeah.
Wow. I had an interesting experience in the 92nd Street Y. I conducted various Handel oratorios there, like Samson and Joshua. But I asked, I think his name was Omar Hirschbein.
Omas Hirschbein.
Omas Hirschbein. He was the head of the Y, or the music division. And I knew the answer, but at that point in my life, I wanted so much to conduct the St. John Passion of Bach. And I asked him if I can do it there. He said, no. I understand why.
Yeah. Well, the St. John Passion, as you know,
I know.
Has stimulated a good deal of anti-Semitism during the year.
Yeah, but I've changed the words. Other conductors have changed the word "die Völker" instead of the Jews. You know, the people.
Right.
Anyway, how about Dr. Ruth?
Well, Dr. Ruth is a great. She loves music. She is really. She trained as a kindergarten teacher, but didn't think that she could really sing, so she gave that up. A very interesting life. She's good friends with Zubin Mehta.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and within the course of a week, of the same week, decades ago, Zubin and I said the same thing to her, completely unrelated. Everybody can sing. It's just a matter of what the range is. And she, like many people, has a range of about a fifth to an octave, maybe, and she can't imitate you. But if you let her start singing,
right,
she chooses the key, which is true of many, many people. Let them start. It's not perfect, but it's not monotone. No, they can sing. And she, loves the teenagers, and she loves the America-Israel connection, and she's just an incredibly loyal friend and a great woman.
Wonderful. And she's still with him, right? And she's,
Oh yeah, she's 92, and I think she's doing another program on German radio next year. It's awesome. She's getting
it really is. Like Thea Musgrave is 92 and she's still composing, and wow, it's inspiring, right?
it is. It's inspiring that, and it's something to learn too. How the skills that people who've made it to that age, what they're able to let go of, what lines they will never cross.
Right.
But I can tell you one of the ridiculous differences between Ruth and Elie Wiesel. I could walk in the street, for a mile with Elie Wiesel and no one would know who he was, even though he was a Nobel laureate. You can't walk a half a block with Ruth without someone coming over to her. And they're of course all, they heard her speak 30 years ago and they expect that she would remember them.
And she probably does.
No, but she's very gracious.
Yeah, that's nice. Before we go, can you tell us about some of your other musical experiences, both in and out of the Jewish realm?
Well, when I was conducting orchestras, which I sometimes have the time to do, I love programming music by Jewish composers. So, Aaron Copland and George Gershwin, because I'm an American Jew, and there's an ethos and a musical style that has always appealed to me. Copland and the Americana that he never saw, but still managed to capture in Appalachian Spring, for example. And Gershwin, I remember being 4 years old, and I was lucky my parents were both very musical. So on Saturday nights, my father would play Schubert Lieder and my mother would sing.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and since my mother's name was Sylvia, so Voz Sylvia was like every week. But Gilbert and Sullivan as well. So it was a great upbringing. I forgot what you asked me, so I
asked you about your other activities.
Oh, so I had an affinity with Gershwin, and when I was 4, I remember making believe I was a trumpet player, just with my hands, to be able to play some of those great themes in American in Paris and in Rhapsody. And it was my luck actually to conduct Bill Westney, our friend, in 2 or 3 performances of Rhapsody in Blue. So that was a nice unity.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
With which orchestra?
In El Paso, the El Paso Symphony, which really became a really first-rate orchestra. First time I heard them, they were playing Sacre de Pronto. Now, you can't be, you need to be a real orchestra to play that.
Yeah. I wonder if Beto knows about him. Isn't Beto?
Oh, that's a different generation.
I know. That's great.
Yeah.
And then the American Symphony you conducted?
The American Symphony again was a program of Appalachian Spring and Rhapsody and some American Jewish composers that most of your audience wouldn't know. Mayor Finkelstein, a West Coast composer who wrote some really terrific things. But I know that repertoire, and I love that repertoire, and it's very fulfilling for me to conduct that kind of repertoire. Of course, if I had a chance to conduct Beethoven 7, I would do it in a heartbeat, because that was the first piece that I ever really learned. I was lucky to have parents for whom music was really the high point. And we listened to it all the time. I remember going on trips in the car with my parents and my sister, and we'd play Name That Tune to QXR. and my father was infallible. I mean,
wow.
Really infallible.
Wow.
He would name composers I had never heard of, like Boieldieu. What is that? He had actually studied clarinet at Juilliard very, very briefly. Okay. But he was an amateur conductor. You sang as a boy soloist for Sterner. I sang as a boy soloist for my father.
Wow. And was he a rabbi?
No, not at all. He was an amateur musician who ended up going into his father-in-law's business. But we always were in his store. There was always music on the radio, and it was the only place where you could buy juvenile furniture and listen to the Schubert Octet and be sure of it.
Well, nowadays you walk into a store, they'll play rap music or whatever, and they dare not play too much classical, you know.
Listen, even QXR will only play one movement of a symphony.
Oh, it's just horrible. It's just horrible. I mean, I remember being on WNCN annually at Christmas time, doing a Christmas music program before it became a rock station. It's just awful. But we do have streaming, and you know, I watch YouTube a lot now. There's anything you want there, pretty much.
It's a sad, you know, that remember this famous remark, military military music is to music as military justice is to justice.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And popular music is to, you know, music as popular religion is to religion.
I know, and yet you watch when I watched the inauguration, those military players were like, whoa, they were so in tune and precise. My goodness.
Yeah. Well, there are many where it's pretty much the same age. There are many great musicians who they didn't want to go to Canada during the Vietnam War, but they didn't want to fight, so they didn't want to go to Vietnam primarily, but they entered into the armed forces band or the armed forces chorus.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, if you ever, as you say, you can hear it all the time. These are first-rate players and singers.
Look what you and I missed out on. We could have done that.
We did okay for ourselves.
Yeah, we did okay, is right.
And for our musical communities too.
Exactly. Well, is there anything else you want to say before we depart?
Depart only temporarily, though, of course.
Temporarily. Like
well, you know, well, I've admired you for a long time, and I really follow. I love watching you conduct. I love the repertoire you do, and the expertise that you show. And we both conduct by memory almost all the time. And that's really the communication. And your singers know it, your players know it, my singers, my players know it, because that's really what it's about. That the top of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, where Adam's finger is not quite touching God's finger, and there's that synapse of divinity, and not even religious divinity, just the spirituality that music can bring. And that's what we both try to bring to the community and to bring people together. And that's the source, another source of our friendship.
Indeed. And just to remind everybody, you have done remarkable things in the Jewish choral realm, unbelievable, and it's still expanding. I'm very impressed that you're starting yet, another division of it, the younger kids.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't like to say cradle to grave, but it's coming close. I said cradle to grave.
Yeah, right.
Because we're providing, and this is, if any of your viewers or listeners have an interest in Jewish choral music, and they're Jewish or not, doesn't make a difference to me. As far as the North American Jewish Choral Festival, which we hope we'll have this summer in person, because it's the end of July, and if the dynamic really speeds up, we should be able to hold it in person. But it's really, we have all levels of singers. We create instant choirs there, as you might remember. So you don't come with your choir, you come as an individual, and you self-select if you're an expert or whether you're, an agnostic singer. I don't know if I can sing, maybe I can sing, maybe I can't sing. And so we place you in and you sing with other individuals. It's 5 days of music making, and no one cares about anything except, could we find another tenor, please?
Yeah, right. Well, that's great. What you've done is remarkable. And the fact that you keep that going year after year also, and yet probably a lot of people come every year to that. And
they do. There are a lot of returnees. It's kind of camp for them, and it's really the only place where people can leave all their political stuff behind, leave all their denominational stuff behind, because what people talk about when they talk about it, but in the programming way, there's 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours a day of pure music making, and people are getting what they want, which is to be free of everything else and just to be in the music. And that's our great joy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
Pleasure.
This has been so much fun and enlightening, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, and maybe we should talk to Bill and Elliot now that they're so far away. Elliot is in LA and Bill is in Texas. So
well, I'll tell our listeners the story where we used to sing Coney Island Baby and other things. And for Elliot Levine, who was one of the founders of Western Wind, his fellow singers gave him a send-off party at Merkin Concert Hall. And the four of us got together and we rehearsed just for a few minutes because it all came back to us. And we sang Goodbye, My Coney Island Baby, you know.
With all the looks that we used to share.
All the looks, you know.
I'm going to share with our listeners a very funny thing that I'm not even sure you're aware of in those back in the old days, which is that you and Bill, as I mentioned, have perfect pitch, and I don't. And Elliot, because he was singing all the time, developed near perfect pitch. Well, yeah. When you start a barbershop quartet, you usually sing the first note.
Yeah.
But we didn't.
You didn't.
And I just had to find my way. So in barbershop quartet world, I could find that a natural for myself.
You jumped right in. Nobody could tell you didn't have perfect pitch. Oh my God, it was so much fun. And this was fun too. Thank you, Mate.
My pleasure, Harold. Great to be with you.
Thanks.
All best.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. So at the North American Jewish Choral Festival, any level of singer is welcome. We have lectures as well as the instant chorus I was just mentioning to you. And all lovers of Jewish music are welcome. If you identify as Jewish or you know someone, a teenager or 7th and 8th grader or a young adult or a college student, then please reach out to us at info@zamirchoralfoundation.org, and we will surely have a place for you to sing in a first-rate choir, singing first-rate music.
Pour